It is one of those rare occasions where we find something that's really cool that we didn't expect. When serendipity raises its hand and says, "I'm here, come and find me," this is one of those cases. This is a really interesting high mass star forming region. I'm going to just call it G9.62. Originally, Carl Menton found that it had the brightest methanol maser in 1991, and then amazingly, Sharmila Goedhart discovered that it was also periodic, the first of its kind for star forming regions. Myself and a few others even found that it had systematic velocity drifts about its neutral velocity at 1.2 kilometers per second. Today, we're going to talk about something totally new and interesting in this source as it relates to the periodicity. So, get ready to be surprised, because I was. G9.62 is a massive star-forming region found in a stellar nursery. Images from telescopes around the world are presented here, courtesy of maserdb.net, show that stellar nursery in which there will be other massive stars and intermediate mass stars forming. All data to be presented here comes from the Hitachi 32-meter telescope at Ibaraki Station, a branch of the National Astronomical Observatories of Japan. The telescopes are jointly operated with the Ibaraki University. So all of this data is part of the Ibaraki 6.7 GHz Methonal Maser Monitoring iMet program, and all can be found online, and I'll show a link below. A special thanks goes out to Professors Yanakura and Tanabe and their postdocs and graduate students for doing excellent work observing and monitoring these many sources that we found this interesting discovery in. This is the Ibaraki dynamic spectra of G9.62. A moment ago you saw a glimpse of the Hartreo dynamic spectra. You might notice something a little different in it, a little odd, a little surprising. If you don't, I'll try to make it a bit clearer for you. This is the feature that I'm actually most interested in. It looks almost like a ruler in the top part of the diagram of the dynamic spectra. And you might notice that there's two features, one at 8.1 and another at 8.8 kilometers per second. The one at 8.1 kilometers per second shows the clear periodicity of the 243-day period first discovered by Sharmila Goedhart in 2003. The one above shows that periodicity, but it shows other secondary flares. And I'll blow this whole region up for you so you get a better look at it. Here you can see a blown up version of the dynamic spectra from 7 to 10 kilometers per second. And now you start noticing, although it's still very, very difficult to see it entirely, you start noticing these little flares in between the primary flare here and then the secondary flares. And what you will start noticing is the secondary flares do not always start at the same point after the primary flare. And likewise, they're not just getting weaker one after the other. So those are two important factors to keep in mind when we try to figure out what we're looking at here. But there's clearly a secondary flare, and the only way to figure out what the heck we're looking at is to start analyzing this by looking at its Loeb-Scargel periodogram and things like that. Let's take a look at that. So here's where our analysis begins of these two features, one at 8.1 and the other at 8.8. On the left-hand side, you see the time series of the integrated flux, and I've chosen plus minus 5 channels about the individual velocities for each to try to get better sensitivity because they are quite weak. We can clearly see for 8.1 kilometers per second a primary flaring every 243 days, and if you go to the Loeb-Scargel power spectrum on the right, you will see the 243-day period. And then you also see this comb effect where you have subharmonics of 243 days. That's the result of the Loeb-Scargel power spectrum, where it's really just a summation of sinusoids. And these are the frequencies of the harmonic sinusoids you'd have to add in to create this profile of one of these flares. So it's telling you that this flare is not a sinusoid. It's not an individual sinusoid. It's actually something that's got a sharp rise and a long tail, very much what was found by Sharmila Goedhart in 2003. For our surprise source at 8.8, we can see the periodicity we can see the primary flares lining up, although they're not particularly bright as it relates to the secondary flares, up and down. And then you can see in Lobskargo, you get the 243-day period. It's clear you only see one or two of the comb of the primary, but you see this very, very strong P equals 52-day flare or signal. And that is the surprise secondary flaring. And that flaring is not linked to is not caused by the primary flaring at 243 days. So its flares are brighter and weaker across its spectrum when they're occurring, and the timing of them is not always the same as it relates to the primary flare. And what we've done at the bottom is I've simply normalized the 8.1 to the 8.8, subtracted 8.1 from 8.8 flux, and I fit a sinusoid to it, and what we're left with is only the P equals 52 days. So there is some evidence of the 243, but generally speaking, it's one source. So this very narrow spike tells us it must be sinusoidal, and our fit with the sinusoid wasn't too bad, wasn't great, but wasn't too bad. Here you can see the phase of the flare profile. In the case of 8.1 kilometers per second, it had a 243-day period, and we can see here that's folded, it's very nice, very clean. It does have a relatively sharp rise and a slightly longer tail. For the 52-day period at 8.8 kilometers per second, that is not the case. You clearly see a nearly sinusoidal flare profile. And that explains why we saw that very sharp, very narrow signal at 52 days in the Lobskargo periodogram, and why there was no comb for that matter as well. Finally, we asked the question, what is causing this surprising result? And the clear answer, and this is the winner, and I'm really telling you this, and you can't say that in a paper, but I'm going to say it now. We don't know. We just don't know. And maybe one of you listening to this will solve this puzzle. We put forward 4 hypotheses. The first one we thought obviously was subharmonics, and we've shown in the Lobskargo that that's not the case. The second is Dickey superradiance, but we find it not really satisfactory, largely because the ringing doesn't occur at the exact same time all the time, and it should have an exponential decay, neither of which we saw. So we're not sure that that's the case, though we still study. The third one, and the one that I kind of originally thought might be the leading candidate, was a secondary pulsation. So you have the primary pulsation, a radial pulsation of some ilk at 243 days, and then you have some sort of non-radial pulsation at 52 days. And that seemed very reasonable. I mean, sort of things like that happen in our Lyris, for instance. We know this isn't a late-type star, I understand. I'm just saying. So that is the third possibility. And finally, the last one we cannot discount is the possibility of coincidence. You have 2 star-forming regions in the same field of view. This is a 32-meter telescope with a 4.6 arc-minute beam. So it's quite large. And it definitely has 2 star-forming regions in the field of view and they have overlapping velocity extents. That can be seen in all the literature, okay? But it also could be, never mind 2 star-forming regions, it could be another pulsating radio source or another periodic radio source in the field of view as well, such as an intermediate mass star, which periodically produces radio emissions sufficient to turn on a maser. So we don't know. The answer is we don't know. And perhaps one of you will solve this riddle, and you'll be making the next great surprise in this source. So, happy observing. The GERA Foundation will produce more videos like this. Please like, share, or subscribe if you enjoyed this video.